But David, let me ask you this. This is a big one for me, and it's just difficult for me to get my arms around this. And my perspective on this honestly changes almost daily. But if we could, let's just talk for a moment about the human side of the equation. And that is, there's a growing conversation about AI's impact on human creativity and critical thinking. What's your take on this? I know you alluded to it a little bit earlier in the conversation, but what's your take on the impact of AI and what is it going to do in terms of human creativity and critical thinking? And really quick, David, it just makes my skin crawl to think that thought leaders or people can use AI to become a thought leader when they're really not, or to create this incredible work of art when it's not from an artist at all, right? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'll take the creativity side first. And first, what I'll say is every time that there has been a new media technology, there has always been a crisis in the arts. So, and this goes back to the invention of the printing press and the rise of novels. So, if you were a proper Victorian gentleman or lady, you did not read novels. It was considered unethical and immoral because it was you could read everything from subversive ideas about how to raise children to how to approach your marriage and sexuality. And so, there was what's called the penny dreadful, right? It was cheap, tripe novels that were published en masse back in, Victorian England. And they thought that they honestly thought that novels were going to cause the unraveling of the fabric of society, much like how we thought that video games were going to do that in the 90s, right? Of
Yeah.
course, novels are now commonplace and nobody really debates about that. Well, I guess there's a few political factions that want to ban books, but people that burn books, they typically don't last that long. Likewise, debates around video games. Yeah, there's some pros and cons to video games. Certainly, video game addiction is a thing, but it's not causing the collapse of society. So every time that there is a technological change, you always have people gatekeeping. So whether it is artists like graphic artists saying, hey, like you need to do this by hand. If you don't do it by hand, it's not quote unquote real art. Painters said the same thing with the rise of photography. And then photographers said the same thing with the rise of digital art in the first place. And so what happens, though, is you have an expansion of the arts over time. We actually have more art in the world today than ever before. We have more artists in the world than ever before. And we have more modalities of art than ever before. Then you divide fine art, so like art with a capital A or fine art, which is art for its own sake, versus commercial art. Commercial art we are used to. That is Hollywood, that is syndicated TV, that is, pictures and paintings like stock footage that you use for business purposes. None of that is like, that's just going to get cheaper, right? Like I use Midjourney all the time for my YouTube videos, for my thumbnails. That makes my job cheaper, easier, and faster. And likewise, generative art from the creative perspective is going to make business cheaper, leaner, faster, so on and so forth. Now, it's going to be really awful for the people that are going to lose their jobs because of that. However, it's not really going to change our relationship with fine art. And so what I mean by that is, as an example, I mentioned earlier that I'm an author. So my novel is with the editors for the final pass. It was entirely written by hand, the hard way, the long way. And then I paid, an editor for developmental editing. That was a human. And now I'm paying a copy editor to do the final pass. So this, as an expression of my truth, the story that I wanted to tell, has nothing to do with artificial intelligence. Now, is Amazon and Netflix, are they going to start churning out AI generated content? Almost certainly. But again, commercial art is nothing new. This is just another tool to generate commercial art, but we will always prefer fine art and real experiences. So another example that I like to give is you have literally billions of songs at your fingertips with Spotify and iTunes. People still go to concerts. You still go to the orchestra. You might not go as often. People also, even though you have Netflix and Amazon and all those other things, people still go to stage plays. People still go to the theater because there is something quintessentially human that is very important to us about connecting with other humans. And this is a concept that collectively I call the meaning economy. So right now we're in a service-based economy. And one thing that I predict is going to transition is, yes, the service economy will always exist. It's going to change drastically, but we're going to see the rise of a new kind of economy. And that's what I call the meaning economy. And that fine art is part of that. There's other aspects of that, but I consider myself part of the meaning economy because that's what I do with my podcast is I help people understand what does it mean? What does it mean to be human in this space, and what does it mean to us philosophically, spiritually, politically, economically, and so on.